Okay, good morning. Today's message is titled, How is Capital Punishment Merciful? So, interesting question, I thought, and I'll kind of go into why I wanted to study this. But first of all, Isaiah 5:20 on your handout, and there'll be a handout online. It says, Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. So the reason I wanted to touch on this, Chuck and I were talking, we were painting last week when he pulled me back into the painting world after 20 years. That was painful. Did it hurt? Yes, it hurt. Office boy cannot paint. We were talking about capital punishment, and I said, yeah, it's interesting. It drives me nuts now because people out there, and I've got some statistics, but they generally view capital punishment as cruel and unmerciful and terrible, and we should ban it. But the exact opposite is true, and I want to kind of walk through how is it merciful and who is it merciful on, like which party's involved. And generally I'm talking about murder, first-degree murder. That's kind of the gist of the message. But it's funny because today, the more I go in life, the more I find that things are like the exact opposite of the way they should be. So it's like a truth in the world is the exact opposite of the Bible. And that's when you know that you actually have an adversary. That's not a coincidence. So we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. So their wisdom is the exact opposite of the Bible, and I find that in many things. So this is one of them. So just some quick stats. This isn't in your notes, but there were 14,827 murders in the United States in 2012. That was the last year you can get stats for some reason. So over 14,000 murders in a year. In 2014, there were 19 murderers put to death in the U.S. so far. 7 in Texas. And they spent an average of 18 years on death row. So more on that in a minute. But today there's also 18 states that outlaw the death penalty, including Illinois in 2011. Thank you, outgoing Governor Quinn. Don't let the door hit you. So, yeah. So it's outlawed in 18 states. Something that the Bible says we should do, that's set up by God, is outlawed in 18 states. There's a site there's many sites that are anti-death penalty. One called deathpenalty.org says capital punishment goes against almost every religion. Although isolated passages of religious scripture have been quoted in support of the death penalty, almost all religions in the United States regard executions as immoral. So I did a little fact checking. I thought, yeah, that sounds a little extreme. There's got to be, maybe half support it, half don't. So I looked up, various sites that had some articles on it or a section on it, and they're right. I mean, just about every single religion out there speaks against it. Catholics, Judaism, Lutheran, pretty much everyone. The only one I found that actually supports it is Southern Baptist. So, and they're a lot more Bible-based than the others. So they're right. So just about everybody in the religious world is against it, and just quite a few average folks are too. As I go online, I see that more and more. You just see a lot of this I will look at way too many different blogs and political sites, and all the youth thinks it's the most terrible, unmerciful thing.
Those 18,000 murders, that was in 2013, you said?
It was 14,827 in 2012. So there were 18, they spent an average, and there were 19 murderers put to death in the U.S. this year. And they spent 18 years on death row, and there's 18 states that outlaw the death penalty. So, okay, let's get into some verses. Look at Genesis 9, 5 through 6. Genesis 9, 5 through 6. I think everyone's seen this passage. And surely your blood of your lives will I require. At the hand of every beast will I require it. And at the hand of man, at the hand of every man's brother, will I require the life of man. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made he man. So this is an edict by God passed down to us to deal with sin in the right way. There's many, many verses. Let's look at a couple more really quick. Exodus 21:12. He that smiteth a man so that he die shall be surely put to death. Interesting in the next verse 13, and if a man lie not in wait, but God deliver him into his hand, then I will appoint thee a place whither he shall flee. So this is another, in the Bible, I mean, you could tell our whole justice system was based on the law and the Bible. I mean, there's no doubt. You could, as I study, there's all these little tangents that you can go off, and it's really hard. I forget how hard it is to stay on topic in a message. But, it deals with first-degree murder and second-degree murder, and first-degree is kind of lying in wait. That's a term that you see over and over. So if you are lying in wait, what do we call that today? Yeah, and it's premeditated. So if you're lying in wait for something, the Bible distinguishes that from second-degree murder and even manslaughter. So there's all these different ways to deal with it. So I'm generally talking about first-degree murder, lying in wait. The righteous thing to do is you would be put to death by man in a government form. Leviticus 24:17. And we don't have to turn there. And he that killeth any man shall surely be put to death. So, very simple, very clear, no doubt about it in the Bible. Side note, this is a verse that, it's so simple, but it screwed me up for years. I don't know why. Exodus 20:13. Exodus 20:13. So this is the traditional 10 Commandments. Very simple verse. Thou shalt not kill. So if you know the answer to this, don't say it. But how do you recognize, just looking at those verses, he that killeth any man shall surely be put to death, thou shalt not kill. Is there a contradiction in the Bible? Very simple. They're saying completely opposite things. Anybody know? How do you reconcile that? There's one word. This is why every word matters. Chuck knows, I know. Chuck, say it.
What, kill and murder?
Now, how do those verses?
Kill's not the same as murder. Murder's specific. Kill's
Yep.
Generic.
True, but this, in verse 13, thou shalt not kill. What's thou?
You.
It's second person in singular. Second person singular. So it's thou Bob shall not kill. If it said ye, all of us shall not kill, that's a problem. But it's thou, it's you as an individual shouldn't kill. It's society that deals with this. So that little word sets it apart, and that distinguishes you shouldn't kill anyone. Even if it's you wronged, you shouldn't go, there's verses that support you shouldn't go out and just execute somebody because you've been wronged. Or if they kill your brother or sister, it still has to go through the process. There has to be 2 or 3 witnesses. It's just like our judicial system when it's functioning right. So that word is very important. That's an individual shall not kill. Okay, so how is capital punishment merciful? First of all, it's merciful as a satisfying payment to God's justice and the family members of the victim. Look at Exodus 21:23 through 24. If you're right there. And if any mischief follow, then shalt give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. So that's often quoted as an individual revenge verse. You know, eye for an eye, and they misquote that and mix it up with judicially. That's how we need to deal with. You need to mete out the punishment according to the crime. So if someone, look at Exodus 22:1. Exodus 22:1. If a man shall steal an ox or a sheep and kill it or sell it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. So there's lots and lots of verses that say if you do this, then you have to give that in return. If you steal something, you have to give 5-fold or 10-fold in return. What's the problem if you murder someone? They're gone. They're gone forever. So Israel had to come with sacrifices. What was the sacrifice for murder? If you murdered someone, what was your sacrifice?
You're the sacrifice.
You're the sacrifice. So that is true today. So you become the sacrifice for murder. There's no replacing another individual made in God's image. Look at Numbers 35:19 through 21. This is what I was asking Chuck for the message. I want to make sure I have this term right. I'm sure there's a whole study that you can do just on this term. Numbers 35:19 through 21. The revenger of blood himself shall slay the murderer. When he meeteth him, he shall slay him. But if he thrust him of hatred, or hurl at him by lying await, that he die, or in enmity smite him with his hand, that he die, he that smote him shall surely be put to death, for he is a murderer. The revenger of blood shall slay the murderer when he meet him. So that term's, I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but that term occurs several times too. And as far as I can understand it, that's a kin, a close relative of the murderer. That's the revenger of the blood. So that's a merciful way to deal with that murderer, is that kin, that family member. And Chuck mentioned there's other cases where the family throws the first stone, on that murder. So it's a satisfying payment to that family member. It's merciful to that family member in addition to dealing with the actual sin. Just to take a look at the kind of the due process. Look at Deuteronomy 17:6 through 7. Deuteronomy 17:6 through 7. At the mouth of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall he that is worthy of death be put to death. But at the mouth of 1 witness he shall not be put to death. The hands of the witnesses shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterwards the hands of all the people. So thou shalt put the evil away from among you. So that's saying, first of all, you need at least 2 or 3 witnesses. It's not just one individual. And it's funny because that's Paul's epistles. That's what to bring an accusation against an elder. That's still true. 2 or 3 witnesses need to come forth. And there's another verse, I won't have time to go there, but that doesn't mean eyewitness. That's just a witness of, what took place. And also, they are the first, if you look at that, again, that verse 7, the hands of the witnesses shall be first upon him to put him to death. So typically, what are the witnesses at a murder trial? Who are the people that stand up? And and it's in many cases it's the family members, it's the relative, it's the friends. Those are the first to deal with the criminal. So in other words, the first way it's capital punishment is merciful is it pays for the sin and it gives justice to the family. Okay, so that's one. Second one is pretty simple. It's merciful to the future victims of the murderer. So this one I don't have a really good example, but a guy in the Bible, online published an entire list, and I could pass it out, but some of these are kind of gruesome, of a short list of murderers released to murder again. John Miller, California, killed an infant 1957, convicted of murder 1958, paroled 1975, killed his parents 1975. Michael Lawrence, Florida, killed robbery victim, life term 1976, paroled 1985, killed robbery victim, condemned 1990. Edward Kennedy, Florida, killed motel clerk, sentenced to life, escaped 1981, killed policeman and male civilian after prison break. Timothy Buss, murdered 5-year-old girl, sentenced to 25 years in 1981, paroled 1993. Murdered 10-year-old boy, condemned in 1996. So this one's pretty obvious. You know, when you deal with the sin, no more victims are the result of that particular murder. So it's merciful. Dealing with the sin is merciful on the future victims of that person. And there's a lot of cases too where, you know, guys, I mentioned that the death row sentence is 18 years. What do they have to do to those guys? They keep them where? In isolation, right? They say dead man walking. Because why? They have nothing to live for. And there's many times where those guys will still kill someone because they don't care. They're already on death row. It doesn't matter. So that's not the right way to deal with that kind of sin. So it's merciful to the future victims of the murderer. And this one is often debated. Number 3, it's merciful to society to prevent future murderers. Look at Deuteronomy 19:20 through 21. Yeah, 19:20 through 21. I really need to get a bigger Bible. Yeah. Okay, let's see. 19:20 through 21. And those which remain shall hear and fear, and shall henceforth commit no more any such evil among you. And then thine eye shall not pity, but life shall go for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. So there's that phrase again. So that, what does that say in 21? Thine eye shall not pity. So what do you have a lot of now? A lot of people pitying the criminal, the murderer. You know, it says, thine eye shall not pity. There's other verses that says, on the flip side, when you do capital punishment, you should take no pleasure in it. Because why? What are we capable of? Same thing. You're no better than them. So you shouldn't pity, so take no pleasure in it either. But the key term in that verse, those two verses, and those which remain shall what? Hear and fear. Fear. Hear and fear. Yep. So that's brought up several times. Look at Deuteronomy 21:21. And all the men of his city shall stone him with stones, that he die. So shalt thou put away evil from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear. So we call that a deterrent, right? In the Old West, they used to have public hangings. You know, they stopped that practice, but what did you do? You know, if somebody murdered someone, they were put on trial, you gathered in the town square, and, you know,
might have been your kids.
Yeah, you brought your family, you brought your kids. So now, of course, today we would think that's horrific, and that's the evilest thing you could ever do. But if you...
What's the kid say?
Yeah.
Why are they doing that?
Yep.
Parents say, this is the reason.
Yep.
So what does the kid do?
Hear and fear.
I don't want that.
Do that.
Yeah. So that, if you saw that happening, that probably would cure you of any intention to murder someone, is to do it publicly. Now we do it more in secret, and it's typically just the immediate family that goes in there. So better practice to do it publicly. Look at Ecclesiastes 8:11. It's another one that gets quoted a lot. Ecclesiastes 8:11, because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. So I mentioned the average murderer on death row is waited 18 years. That sound speedy? No. I mean, Emma wasn't even alive when these guys committed their crime that they were executed for. There was that's not speedy, that's not creating any fear, that's not having a deterrent effect on society. They're shoved off. And that's, of course, just the ones that are dealt with. There's, those 18 states that will never deal with it, and they will just go off in a prison even if they can continue to execute or kill more and more. Yeah.
Politically incorrect case, that's speedy.
Yeah, true. If you're on the wrong side of the aisle there. So
like
it's...
a Marine down in Mexico.
Well, that guy McVeigh is executed.
Yeah.
We're not trying to... He was a nut.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a confused as well.
When there's an outcry, maybe it happens. So it's merciful to society to prevent future murderers and future victims. Finally, this is the one that I wish I had more verses to support it, something we could study deeper. It's merciful to the murderer. Look at Isaiah 14:15. Isaiah 14:15. So this is talking about Satan. Look at verse 14. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. So what do we know about hell? There's sides to it, and Satan's going to be on the side. And that sounds like the worst place to be, if if you can interpret that. So there's a degree of suffering, just like there's a degree of reward in heaven to a believer. There's a degree of suffering in hell. So what do you do? A lot of murderers, when they get caught, they actually express relief. There was a guy that was in Pennsylvania that finally got caught, and he was relieved, because guess what? You can't continue to commit any more murders. Even murderers, they have a conscience given to them by God. So, when somebody comes in and physically stops you from doing that activity anymore, it's actually a relief. I can't do that anymore. You've stopped me. So, but to those...
It's relief because you paid for it.
Yep.
Society, you paid for
Yeah, and there's a punishment that you're going to justly receive.
And your soul is relieved.
Right. But to the ones that either don't get caught or continue to murder, there is another degree of suffering that they're going to go through, and I would be willing to bet, there's murderers in hell that if they had the choice, they would have said, I wish I would have gotten caught sooner. If I could have just gotten caught after that first one and dealt with, now I'm in the sides of the pit because I kept going, or society never stopped me.
I scar tissued my conscience.
Right.
I deadened it.
Right. And now you're paying for it in a worse way. So it's merciful to the murderer. All right, so we're going to wrap this up, but I have another side note in this whole thing. Look at, this one isn't in your notes. Look at Numbers 16 through 18. What did I say? Numbers 35. 16 through 18. Numbers 35, 16 through 18. And if he smite him with an instrument of iron, so that he die, ye shall pass laws against the instrument of iron, so that no one else could be murdered by an instrument of iron. Is that what that says?
No, he's a murderer.
He's a murderer. And if he smite him with an instrument of iron, so that he die, he is a murderer. The murderer shall be put to death. And keeps going. And if he smite him with throwing a stone, wherewith he may die, and he die, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. Or if he smite him with an hand weapon of wood, wherewith he may die, and he die, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. So what do we like to do? We like to outlaw the murder weapon. We like to take the crime and the responsibility away from the murderer and put it on the object. So the Bible just goes through all those things, that whatever it is, it doesn't matter what object that person used. The murderer shall be put to death. So it's just a side note there, because that's the opposite reaction we have. And what does society in general feel like? They by doing that, they're saying, you're not evil, the object is evil. It's the heart that's evil. It's not the object doesn't jump up and murder someone. That's ridiculous. Okay, so conclusion. Well, look at the Proverbs 12:10. This doesn't exactly apply, but this verse kind of comes to mind. It's more about beasts of the field. Proverbs 12:10. A righteous man regardeth the life of his beast, but the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. I think of that term, the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. So the unrighteous, the unsaved that say, capital punishment is unmerciful, you're the one that's unmerciful. That's cruel. It's the opposite. Again, that's why we know we have an adversary, because the wisdom of this world is the opposite of the Bible. So to sum up, capital punishment is merciful on the murder itself. It deals with the murder, the crime. It's a satisfying payment to the family members. It's merciful to the future victims of the murderer. It's merciful to society and to prevent future murderers. And it's merciful on the murderer, so that they can get cut off and they don't have to continue to commit more crimes and go to the sides of the pit. I'll close. This is this is something that, we as a society, we as Americans, we still, some ways we still hold up the Bible, but we've fallen a long way. Got some other statistics. I mentioned the murders that occurred, and about 14,000, and that was true throughout the years. About, call it 15,000 murders a year. And of those, 19 were dealt with. 19 murders were caught and put to death. That's like 0.1%. As of 2014, year to date, there has been 931,265 abortions this year. 1.2 million on average per year. So if you take that versus the murder rate, on average, there's 80 unborn children murdered every year for every one adult that's murdered in the country. 80 to 1. And which one of those is our society allowing and legalizing, and which one is outlawed? So we're outlawing the capital punishment, the execution of the guilty, the murder. We're outlawing that. That's becoming illegal. But the legal thing is in any state, you can murder an unborn child in this country. 900. So if you go back to Exodus 21:12, he that smiteth a man so that he die shall surely be put to death. looks to me like we have 931,000 murderers. If I read that right. And one other thought, as this was a...
So the mothers that have abortions, they have unresolved guilt because they are a murderer. They had choice, pro-choice,
yeah,
and the baby didn't.
Right, right.
They know it.
Right. So that's, and I won't go too far into that one. That's a study for another day. But going back to the whole first-degree murder and lying in wait, I was just thinking about this morning. What do you do for an abortion? Do you not set an appointment? Do you not schedule it? Do you not go through with it, premeditated? Boy, that's pretty scary. So.
And the baby doesn't know what's happening.
Nope. And is that innocent? I don't think there's anything more innocent than that. So just
you're
when we.
Lying in wait, but the baby, that's why you're lying in wait, because the baby doesn't know.
Right.
So unsuspectingly, the baby is suddenly murdered.
Yeah. So I know that's gruesome, but I bring these up because, believers, we're more needed than ever. I mean, this is going on in society. It's getting legalized. Our fight isn't against, the people of this world. It's against the principalities, the spirit of wickedness. That's where our fight is. So we're not going to go lie down in front of an abortion center. We're going to fight, that spiritual wickedness in high places and get it, get individuals saved. That's how we fight it. It's not our wisdom versus man's wisdom. So, all right, that's it.
I got a question.
Yes.
What about Cain?
Yeah, that was a good one. I knew you'd bring that up. Yeah, and Daniel, or David. Several have been spared that fate, and that's because God is merciful. So that's another study. All right, Emma, you gonna shut me off? Okay.